Banned books you should read when knowledge becomes dangerous. What if I told you that over 10,000 books were banned from American schools in just 1 year? What if I told you that some of the most beloved stories in literature, from Alice in Wonderland to Harry Potter, have been deemed too dangerous for readers? What if I told you that in 2024, we're witnessing the highest levels of book censorship since the Red Scare of the 1950s? This is the story of banned books, and why the stories they don't want you to read are often the stories you need most. Imagine this scenario. You're walking through a library, browsing the shelves, when a stranger approaches you. They reach out, pluck a book from your hands, and say, "You can't read that, I don't agree with it." Your reaction would be immediate. Eyebrows raised, feathers ruffled. Who are they to decide what you can think about? What you can learn from? What stories deserve your attention? Yet this exact scenario is playing out in schools and libraries across America every single day. Not by individual strangers, but by organized groups, school boards, and even government officials who believe they know better than you what information you should have access to. Book banning isn't just a relic of authoritarian regimes or dystopian fiction. It's happening right now in our communities, targeting stories that challenge, inspire, and illuminate the human experience. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. The books being banned aren't fringe propaganda or dangerous manifestos. They're often beloved classics, award-winning novels, and stories that help young people navigate the complexities of growing up. Let me take you on a journey through some of the most banned books in history, and show you why the impulse to censor them reveals far more about the censors than the books themselves. Let's start with a seemingly innocent children's story, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. What could possibly be threatening about a young girl falling down a rabbit hole into a world of talking animals and whimsical nonsense? Well, according to various censors over the years, quite a lot. China banned it in 1931 for depicting animals and humans as equals. The concern? That talking animals might undermine human authority and social hierarchy. In America, some groups targeted it for allegedly promoting drug use. Why? Because the caterpillar smokes a hookah and Alice changes size after eating and drinking mysterious substances. Think about that for a moment. A story written in 1865, intended to celebrate imagination and childhood wonder, was deemed dangerous because it featured a smoking caterpillar and magical transformations. What this really reveals is the deep fear that imaginative literature might encourage people to question reality, to think outside established norms, to believe that different worlds are possible. And perhaps most tellingly, they were right to be afraid of that, because that's exactly what great literature does. The Lorax by Dr. Seuss faced similar scrutiny. This children's picture book about environmental conservation was banned in some American schools for promoting anti-logging sentiment. Let that sink in. A story about caring for trees and the environment was considered so threatening that children needed to be protected from it. The real concern wasn't about logging specifically. It was about the dangerous idea that young people might develop their own opinions about how we treat our planet, that they might ask uncomfortable questions about the consequences of unchecked consumption. Because here's the terrifying truth for those who ban books. A child who learns to care about the environment today might grow up to challenge environmental destruction tomorrow. But the current wave of book banning goes far beyond environmental themes or whimsical talking animals. In 2024, PEN America documented over 10,000 instances of book bans in a single school year. 10,000! That's nearly triple the number from the previous year. What kinds of books are being targeted? Predominantly stories by and about people of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, and books that address real challenges young people face. Mental health, identity, social justice, and yes, sexuality. Dear Martin by Nick Stone tells the story of a black teenager who writes letters to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as he navigates racism and police violence. It was banned for being unacceptable and for its racial tendencies as a negative attribute of society. Read that again. A book by a black author addressing her own experiences with racism was deemed unacceptable because it depicted racism as negative. This isn't about protecting children from inappropriate content. This is about protecting certain worldviews from being challenged by other people's lived experiences. A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle, winner of the Newbery Medal and beloved by generations of readers, was banned for being too complicated for children and for containing anti-religious sentiment. The book's crime? Encouraging young readers to think for themselves, to question authority, and to celebrate difference rather than conformity. Lingle herself said it best. You have to write the book that wants to be written. And if the book will be too difficult for grown-ups, then you write it for children. The Giver by Lois Lowry was banned for addressing themes of suicide and murder. But here's what the censors missed. The book doesn't glorify these things. It shows the dangerous consequences of a society that tries to eliminate all pain, conflict, and difficulty. It's a warning about what happens when we prioritize comfort over truth, safety over growth, conformity over individuality. The irony is breathtaking. A book about the dangers of censoring information and emotion was censored for discussing dangerous information and emotion. Harry Potter, perhaps the most beloved children's series of our time, has been banned in dozens of countries and countless school districts for promoting witchcraft and wizardry. But what are these books really about? Friendship, courage, the fight between good and evil, the importance of love over power, the dangers of prejudice and the value of standing up for what's right. Yet censors focused exclusively on the magical elements, missing entirely the profound moral lessons at the heart of the stories. This reveals something crucial about book banning. It's rarely about the actual content of the books. It's about fear of what those books represent, what questions they might inspire, what conversations they might start. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee has been banned repeatedly for its use of racial slurs and its depiction of racism in the American South. This presents a more complex challenge. The book does contain language that rightfully makes readers uncomfortable. But the question becomes, should we ban books that depict historical racism, or should we use them as opportunities to discuss how far we've come and how far we still need to go? The book doesn't celebrate racism. It exposes it. It doesn't excuse injustice, it condemns it, but it does so in language that reflects the time period it portrays. Rather than banning these difficult books, we could be having thoughtful conversations about how to engage with problematic content critically, how to learn from past mistakes, how to use literature as a bridge to deeper understanding. But banning is easier than teaching. Censoring is simpler than engaging. Removing books requires no nuance, no critical thinking, no uncomfortable conversations. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury presents perhaps the greatest irony in the history of book banning. This novel, which depicts a dystopian society where books are burned to prevent people from thinking dangerous thoughts, has itself been banned. The reasons? Obscene language and negative portrayals of religion. Think about that. We banned a book about banning books. It's as if the censors read Bradbury's warning about the dangers of censorship and thought, that sounds like a great idea. Brothers Grimm fairy tales were banned after World War II for allegedly containing Nazi propaganda and excessive violence. These stories, which had been told for centuries and formed the foundation of much of our storytelling tradition, were suddenly deemed too dangerous for young minds. But fairy tales have always contained violence, danger, and moral complexity. That's what makes them valuable. They help children process difficult emotions and situations in a safe, symbolic context. When we sanitize stories, we rob them of their power to help us understand and cope with the darker aspects of human experience. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was banned in the 1920s for depicting women in strong leadership roles and having no value for children. A girl going on an adventure to defeat an evil witch was apparently too threatening to traditional gender roles. This historical perspective is crucial because it shows us that every generation has its moral panics, its fears about what children should and shouldn't read. What seems obviously absurd to us now, banning books for showing strong female characters, was deeply serious to the people doing the banning at the time. Which should make us wonder, what are we banning today that future generations will find equally absurd? Looking for Alaska by John Green has been repeatedly banned for depicting teenage sexuality and substance use. But here's what this misses. Teenagers are already dealing with these issues in real life. They're navigating questions about sex, drugs, identity, and mortality, whether we give them books about these topics or not. The question isn't whether teenagers should be exposed to these themes. The question is whether they should navigate them alone, in silence, without the guidance and wisdom that thoughtful literature can provide. Books like Looking for Alaska don't corrupt innocent minds. They provide language, context, and perspective for experiences that young people are already having or will soon encounter. They turn isolation into connection, confusion into understanding, shame into acceptance. The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky has been banned for its depictions of mental health struggles LGBTQ+ characters, and sexual abuse. Yet this is precisely the book that reaches readers who feel isolated, different, or traumatized. It tells them they're not alone, that their struggles are valid, that healing is possible. When we ban books that address mental health, we send a dangerous message that these topics are too shameful to discuss, too dangerous to acknowledge, too difficult to face. But mental health challenges don't disappear when we stop talking about them. They just become more isolating, more stigmatized, more dangerous. Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien was banned for being satanic due to its inclusion of wizards and magic. This epic tale of good triumphing over evil, of friendship conquering impossible odds, of ordinary individuals finding extraordinary courage, was deemed dangerous because it included fantasy elements. The irony is that Tolkien was a devout Christian who deliberately infused his work with Christian themes and allegory. But censors saw only the surface elements they feared, missing entirely the deeper spiritual and moral dimensions of the story. So what's really happening when books get banned? It's rarely about protecting children from harmful content. It's about protecting certain worldviews from being challenged or expanded. It's about maintaining power structures that benefit some people while excluding others. It's about fear. Fear of change. Fear of difference. Fear of questions that don't have easy answers. But here's what book banners fundamentally misunderstand. Reading diverse, challenging, even uncomfortable books doesn't corrupt young minds. It strengthens them. When we encounter ideas that challenge our assumptions, we're forced to think more deeply about what we believe and why. When we read about experiences different from our own, we develop empathy and understanding for people who don't look like us, think like us, or live like us. When we engage with difficult topics in the safe space of literature, we're better prepared to handle them when we encounter them in real life. The current wave of book banning isn't just about individual titles or specific content. It's part of a broader attack on education, critical thinking, and the very idea that people should have access to diverse perspectives and information. When books are banned, it's not just the books that suffer. It's the readers who never get to encounter them. It's the students who never get to discuss them. It's the teachers and librarians who are prevented from doing their jobs. It's the erosion of the fundamental principle that in a free society, the cure for speech you don't like isn't censorship, it's more speech. The most insidious form of book banning happening today isn't even formal censorship. It's what educators call soft censorship, when librarians and teachers, fearful of controversy, simply don't purchase books that might cause problems. When authors' visits are canceled because their books address controversial topics, when book fairs are shut down rather than risk community backlash, when entire library collections are reviewed and purged of anything that might offend anyone. This creates a chilling effect where the goal isn't just to remove specific books, but to create an environment where people are afraid to share, discuss, or even think about challenging ideas. But there's hope in this story too, because in the vast majority of cases where books are challenged, they remain available. This happens because of brave librarians, dedicated teachers, engaged students, and community members who stand up for intellectual freedom. It happens because people understand that the right to read is fundamental to democracy, education, and human dignity. It happens because there are organizations like PEN America, the American Library Association, and countless local groups fighting to keep books accessible. And it happens because readers like you recognize that banned books often contain exactly the stories, perspectives, and ideas that are most important to read. So what can you do? First, read banned books. Not because they're banned, but because they're often excellent, important, thought-provoking literature that will expand your understanding of the world. Support your local library and librarians. They're on the front lines of defending intellectual freedom every day. Attend school board meetings. Vote in local elections. Make your voice heard when censorship threatens your community. And most importantly, trust in your own ability and the ability of young people to engage with challenging content thoughtfully and critically. We don't need to ban books to protect children. We need to teach children how to think critically about what they read. We don't need to hide difficult topics. We need to create safe spaces to discuss them. We don't need to eliminate challenging perspectives. We need to learn how to engage with them respectfully and thoughtfully. The books on banned lists aren't dangerous because they contain inappropriate content. They're powerful because they contain necessary content, stories that help us understand ourselves and others, narratives that challenge us to grow, perspectives that expand our vision of what's possible. When Alice falls down the rabbit hole, she doesn't find a world that corrupts her. She finds a world that teaches her to question assumptions, think creatively, and stand up for herself. When Harry Potter learns about magic, he doesn't become corrupted by dark forces. He learns about the power of love, friendship, and moral courage. When readers encounter books about racism, LGBTQ+ experiences, mental health, or social justice, they don't become radicalized. They become more informed, more empathetic, more prepared to live in a diverse world. The greatest threat to democracy isn't books that make us uncomfortable. It's the impulse to silence voices that challenge us to grow. The greatest danger to young people isn't exposure to difficult topics. It's the isolation that comes from feeling like their experiences and questions are too dangerous to discuss. The greatest risk to our society isn't too much information. It's too little understanding. Books are knowledge, and knowledge is power. When knowledge is locked away because it's deemed inappropriate or controversial, we're not just limiting access to information, we're limiting human potential. We're saying that some stories don't matter, some voices don't deserve to be heard, some experiences are too threatening to acknowledge. But every banned book is a reminder that stories have power, that words can change minds, that literature can inspire people to imagine different possibilities and work for a better world. And perhaps that's exactly why they're banned. Because the people doing the banning understand something that readers instinctively know. Books really can change the world, one reader at a time. So read the books they don't want you to read. Think the thoughts they don't want you to think. Ask the questions they don't want you to ask. Because in a free society, the answer to speech you disagree with isn't silence. It's more speech, more stories, more perspectives, more understanding. The banned books list isn't a warning about dangerous content. It's a reading list for people who believe in the power of stories to educate, inspire, and transform. Your mind is not too fragile to handle challenging ideas. Your children are not too vulnerable to engage with complex topics. Our society is not too weak to survive difficult conversations. But we might be too afraid to find out what we're capable of if we stop limiting ourselves to only the stories that make us comfortable. The books are waiting. The stories are calling. The only question is, will you have the courage to answer? Find the complete list of banned books you should read, detailed explanations of why each was censored, discussion guides for navigating challenging content, and resources for defending intellectual freedom at hookedtobooks.com. Your journey into the books they don't want you to read starts with your next library visit.